We're up to Daf Chavav, 5 lines down from the top of the Yomi. B'nei ha'ir shemachru Rakhov Shalir. We're going to now have a machlokes about the status of Rakhov Shalir. Rakhov Shalir is sort of an outdoor synagogue out there in the marketplace that they used to use on occasion, like on a Tainus Tzibur, maybe because there wasn't enough room within the 4 walls containing the synagogue, so they went out into the open air. And now the question is, does Mailim B'Kodesh, as a requirement, apply to Rakhov Shalir? Amar Rabba Bar Bachan Rabbi Yochanan, Zo Divrei Rabbi Nachem Bar Yossi Stumta. That which we see in our Mishnah here at the beginning of Perek Revi, Perek B'nei Ha'ir, that when we sell a Rakhov Shalir, then the monies that we receive in payment have to be dedicated for a higher Kedusha, and that is for the Kedusha Beis HaKnesses. That's the opinion of Rabbi Menachem. However, Chachamim Omrim, a Rakhov ein bo mishum Kedusha. In order to sanctify a place, it has to be surrounded by mojitos on a permanent basis, and it has to be exclusively dedicated long-term as a shul. The Rakhov Shalir might be used on a temporary basis, but not permanently. And therefore, there are no dinim of Mailim B'Kodesh that restrict the sale of Rakhov Shalir. If the townspeople decide to sell the Rakhov Shalir, nothing should hold them back. There's no requirement to take the damim and use it on a higher level. So the Gemara asks Rabbi Menachem Bar Yossi, my timer, why does he hold that there is Kedusha and a sanctified status to the Rakhov Shalir? So there are certain specific days of the year where, in fact, they would pray as a community out in the Rakhov Shalir. For example, on a Tainus Tzibur. This is codified by the Mishnah in Tainus on Daf Tesvav, and also by the Mishnah in Tainus with regard to Mamados on Daf Chavav and Beis, and that means that those members of the Anshe Maimad who live in Yerushalayim would attend a certain special service with certain special prayers, and those prayers were taken out into the Rakhov Shalir. That engenders a Kedushas Makom, so that the difference between Rabbi Nachem and Chachamim is regarding this concept of Kedushas Makom. The Chachamim never accepted Kedushas Makom unless there was a Kedushas Mechitos. And we'll have to see later on, not today, but another daf, what happens if those Mechitos are taken away? Is there a residue of Kedushas Makom, but only because we started with Kedushas Mechitos? According to Rabbi Menachem, you could have Kedushas Makom for Tefillah even without Mechitos. For Rabbanan, Hu Ikrai B'Alma. What do you mean Kedushas Makom? It's a temporary kind of thing. You're using it a couple of days out of a year. Now, the Mishnah paskins that Beis Knesses lochim teva. The teva in which the Sfarim, the Sifrei Torah, were contained has a higher level of Kedusha than that of a Beis HaKnesses. In a word, the highest level of Kedusha outside of the Mikdash is the Kedusha of the Torah, the Sefer Torah. We'll see about the mantle that covers the Sefer Torah. Amar Rab Shmuel Bar Nachmeni Amar Rab Yochanan, and now we're going to have a whole sugi about this Rab Shmuel. Lo shanu ella Beis HaKnesses shel kfarin. When you have a privately owned Beis HaKnesses, then they're allowed to sell the Beis HaKnesses. It's my Beis HaKnesses, I could sell it. The only thing is, I have to use the damim for a higher level of Kedusha because of Mailim B'Kodesh. Avol Beis HaKnesses shel krachim. But what about a publicly owned Beis HaKnesses? Shel Krochim, meaning of a center, an urban center. Kevon Dimi Alma Osule, who comes to daven in a public synagogue? Anybody could come from any place on the face of the earth. No one could stop him. The synagogue is really publicly owned for the entire Knesset Yisrael. Is lo motzi mizabnele, you can't even sell it at all. Who could sell the Beis HaKnesses? The Havile de Rabbim, and the word de Rabbim means the entire community of Israel as a single indivisible entity owns the shul. The shul is not privately owned. It's a Beit Knesset de Krochim, and no one has the right to relinquish ownership and undermine the status of the Beis HaKnesses as a Beis HaKnesses. I remember in London, I don't know if you've been to the Marble Arch Synagogue, and it's a beautiful setup over there. People come from all over the world, and they go to the business district of London, and that's where this Marble Arch Synagogue. I remember the Kiddush, they give a little breakfast every morning. The only problem is, if you have to rent or take a hotel room in that neighborhood, forget it. It's the sky's the limit. You can't get anything for more than 120 pounds sterling. Anyway, Amar Avashi, Hi Bekinishta de Masa Machasya. He says, Rav Ashi, there's an exception to your rule, Rabbi Shmuel. I'm going to give you an example from my local synagogue in Machasya of a public synagogue that is located in an urban center. The Afal Gav de Mi Alma Osule, even though people come to daven there from all over the world, nevertheless, came in the Adaita Didi Ka'asu. I'm the Rav of the shul. And everybody comes because I, so to speak, own the shul, and therefore I can sell the shul, because when people contribute to the shul, they give it as a contribution under the Tanai, under the understanding that the Rav of the shul will decide what he wants to do with these funds, how he wants to earmark these funds. And therefore the Rav represents almost like a private ownership on a public urban shul. And he can decide time to sell the shul. Meisvei, the Gemara now objects to Reb Shmuel, because Reb Shmuel said that if you have a Beis HaKnesses, Shel Krochim, is lo motzi mizabnei, they can't sell it. We have a brisa, Maisa Beis Knesset Shel Amar Yehuda, Maisa Beis Knesset Shel Tursiim. Tursiim had a certain, there was a certain smell in that synagogue. It was a synagogue that was dedicated to Tursiim. Tursiim are those who take metals and they put it through the furnace, through the Kura Barzel, in order to refine them. Right? They didn't necessarily own silver. They were commissioned to refine the silver, but there was a certain smell. And people did not want to visit that Beis HaKnesses, so it was like designated exclusively for the refiners, like the silver refiners. And where was it located? In Yerushalayim. I remember my father told me that in New York, back a century ago, there were certain shuls of certain people. There was the garment center shul, and there were the tailors had their own, every group had their own shuls. And back in Vilna, it was the same. And Machrua l'Rabbi Eliezer, they sold the shul to Rabbi Eliezer, v'yasabo kol tzrachav. He used it for anything, meaning the synagogue lost its status of kiddush, of hegdesh. And yet, it was a public shul. V'ahasam de krachim hava. How will Shmuel be able to justify Rabbi Eliezer, who sold the shul, I'm sorry, who bought the shul, I should say, and also Bakol Tarcha. So where it says Hahu Be Knishta Zute Havu. This base Knesses would serve a very limited population. And it was not built by the city. We'll soon see about the Anshe Ha'ir, but rather it was built by the Tarsian. They built their own small private synagogue, exclusive for the copper designers or refiners. Now the Gemara tells us another brisa that objects and seems to contradict Reb Shmuel. Meisvei, now we're going to learn a little bit about what's called Nege Batim, when there's a Nega in the wall of a bayis. The base Eretz Achuzaschem. This is a parsha in Sefer Vayikra, Perek Yudalid, and the Torah says, with regard to Nega Habayis, that it's in a house in Eretz Achuzaschem. Achuzaschem mitami b'negoyim, but v'ein Yerushalayim mitami b'negoyim. So we need land upon which they built houses, but land that was allotted, apportioned to the Yotzei Mitzrayim, or more likely we should call them the Boy Haaretz. And that becomes Achuzaschem. Once we divide up the land, everyone gets their portion. But Yerushalayim was not divided up. And therefore, there's no Tumas Nigei Batim in Yerushalayim. It's not Eretz Achuzaschem. Amar Rav Yehuda, Ani lo shamati el makom migdash bilvad. I have a tradition that the only location that is excluded from Nigei Batim is the Makom HaMikdash. Habati Knesios Habati Midrashos Metamim. The implication of Rabbi Yehuda's statement is that, as with the exception of the Beis HaMikdash, a regular Beis HaKnesses, without exception, a regular Beis HaMidrash, would be Metami B'tumas Nigei Batim. V'amai, why is this so? Are you telling me that this is not Amai Hadik Krachim Havu? What's he saying over here, Rabbi Yehuda? He's saying that in the case of Batik Nesius and Batik Midrashos, it's considered Achuzaschem, and it therefore is Makabel Tumas Nigei Batim. Then you're telling me that there's private ownership. According to you, Rabbi Shmuel, there's no private ownership. This is a Beis Knesses B'Krachim. So the Gemara answers, Ema Amar Rabbi Yehuda ani lo shamati ela makom mikdash bilvad. He says that instead of makom mikdash, read it as makom mikudash. And makom mikudash is not makabel tumas nigei batim. And what's considered makom mekudash, but they can see also but the midrashos. That's why they would not be makabel tumas negoy. Is memela b'yusheves shitas Rabbi Shmuel, because we're talking about batei knesios that are public in nature, in an urban center, owned by the ganze Welt, and therefore it's not Eretz Achuzaschem. What is the machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and Tanakama about the status of a bias in Yerushalayim, Tanakama Savar lo nischalka Yerushalayim l'shvatim. From Yehuda Savar nischalka Yerushalayim l'shvatim. According to Tanakama, the reason why a bias in Yerushalayim is not makabel tuvas negoyim is because Yerushalayim lo nischalka l'shvatim. We don't have private ownership over the land of Yerushalayim, and therefore it doesn't fall into the category of Eretz Achuzaskam. Achuzaskam, we said, meant private ownership. Rabbi Yehuda says nischalka Yerushalayim l'shvatim. Ubeplukta dahani tanoi, it's an old ancient machlokes about the status of Yerushalayim. We know, for example, that part of Yerushalayim was in Shevet Yehuda, part of Yerushalayim was in Shevet Binyamin. And the Brisa says, Ma hoya bechelko shel Yehuda, what part of the Beis HaMikdash was included in the portion of Chelek of Shevet Yehuda? Harabayis, Halashakos, Ve'ha'azaros. Uma hoya bechelko shel Binyamin, Ulam, Ve'hechal, Ubeis Kodshei HaKadoshim. It sounds like Rabbi Yehuda got the raw end of the deal. That's very nice. He has Lushakos, he has Azoros. He's got the whole Arabayis. But what does he have in the Beis HaMikdash? Binyamin gets the Beis HaMikdash. Could this be? And the Brisa says, no. There was a strip of land that came out of the portion of Yehuda, and it penetrates into the territory of Binyamin, which is the Makom Migdash. Uba Mizbeach Banui. There's Mizbeach built on that Ritzu, on that strip. It's called the Mizbeach strip. And Binyamin now realizes that, with all due respect to his dominion over the Beis Kodesh Kadoshim and the Heichal, he does not have any rights to the Mizbeh. He was anxious about it. He was anguished about it. He was in a state of tension. He was thinking, is there any way of absorbing that ritzua with the mizbeach on it into my territory? And where do we see that he was in such a state of anxiety about it? Shenemar chofef olav kol hayom. And I think the word chofef here, which usually means to cover something, here I think it means that he desires it, he longs for it, he craves for the makom hamizbeach. And because in reward for this longing of Binyamin for the mizbeach, Zacha Binyamin v'nasa ushpizachon lashchina. He became the host, the ushpiza, for the shchina. And that's a reference, of course, to the makom Beis Kodesh Kadoshim, where the Aron was, and that was in the portion of Binyamin. So it's Chofef Olav Kol Hayom. And now we get back to our issue. Was Yerushalayim divvied up amongst the Shvatim? Clearly, yes. This is what Binyamin got. This is what Yehuda got. Yerushalayim l'Shvatim. I do find one Tana in one Brisa who holds Lo Nischalka Yerushalayim l'Shvatim, Desanya, Ein Maskirim Batim B'Yerushalayim. If I own a house in Yerushalayim, I can't rent it out. It's not mine. I'm occupying it. I'm living there, but it's not mine. So the houses of Yerushalayim belong to the public, and that's called lo nischalka l'shvatim, and therefore it's not eretz haschuzaschem, and it's not makabel tuma. We're talking about nigei bat. And if you hold Yerushalayim lo nischalka l'shvatim, then you understand very well the Shita of Tanna Kama as to why a bias in Yerushalayim is not makabel tumas negon. It's not eretz hakuzas. Rabbi Eliezer ben Tzadok Omer, af lo mitos, you're not even allowed to rent out beds in Yerushalayim. Is lefichach, and therefore oros kodshim, which basically are not kadosh, bal yushpizin notlin osan bizroa. So again, bal yushpizin is someone who invites other Jews who are ole regel to stay there in order that they can bring their korbanos, be makayim the mitzvah of B'riyah and Chagiga and whatever other mitzvahs they have to fulfill. And the Bali Ushpizin, who are legally bound and enjoined from charging rent, they have to get some minimal compensation. And it was organized by Chazal that they would get the Oros Kodshin. The Oros Kodshin, as we said, are not Kodesh. But in any event, we see clearly that both the Tanna Kama and Rabbi Eliezer ben Tzadok are of the opinion that Yerushalayim was not divvied up amongst the Shvat. Omar Abaye. Now, Abaye goes off a little bit on a tangent, a drop of an agadic teaching. Shma mina orach ara lemishbak inish gulfa umashcha bishbuk zayich. I don't know if you ever had the experience where, let's say you stay at a hotel. Today it's a little bit more rare to have such a thing where you bring your own, you have your own kalim, your own food. And if you want to express your gratitude to the owner, what did he call it? The Ushpizin, right? The innkeeper. Then when you finish eating and you're left with whatever kalim and so forth, leave them as a gift. Don't take them with you. And therefore, gulfu mashcha bishpuzeh, leave behind the jugs and the hides. That's your way of expressing gratitude to the innkeeper. Amar Rava lo shanu. When do we say Ma'alim b'kodesh ve'ein moridim? Ela shelo machru shiva tuvei ha'ir b'mayim anshe ha'ir. Aval machru shiva tuvei ha'ir b'mayim anshe ha'ir is then afilu lemishta be'shikra shapir dam. So Rava introduces a new entity into the sugya, and that is Shiva Tuvei Ha'ir. Now, I don't think we should make the mistake here of identifying Shiva Tuvei Ha'ir as the Batlanin. We needed, as we saw back in Chav Gimel, Asara Batlanin. They were there for purposes of davening. These are Tuvei. I don't know if they were elected democratically or have it, but the Tuvei were basically the trustees of the town, and they decide what the town owns and should be sold, what it doesn't own, and therefore should not be sold. So that Machru Shivet Tuvei b'Maimed Anshe is then Afilu Lemishta Beishikri. You can take the funds from the sale of the shul and go buy beer. There are no restrictions whatsoever. And it seems like the city and all its urban members they had total faith in the Shiva Tuvei. They'll decide. And the number 7 is significant because it's an odd number. So there should always be a deciding vote. Dummy. It's unbelievable. We're talking about a public shul that could be sold by Shiva Tuvei. The Maimed Anshe. He writes here that the public appointed people, we call them trustees, specifically to sell a synagogue, and one person is considered like what we call Mursheh Chatima. He will represent the rest of the 7, and all kinyanim that were completed. Not only may the proceeds, if it's sold by the Shiva Tuvei, be used for non-sacred purposes, and we don't have a principle of Ma'ila B'Kodesh, but the synagogue itself may be put to non-sacred use by the buyer. All right, for this we have to see the next sugya. Let's do that now.